Steve Jobs once said, "Innovation is the ability to see change as an opportunity, not a threat." Many innovations were just ideas before some enterprising individual or individuals pouring their blood, sweat, and tears bring them into existence.
Pavan, thanks so much for joining us here on our podcast.
Glad.
We are trying to focus on stories of people, products, and services because we are storytellers ourselves. So we thought that our audience would be very interested in the stories behind successful people, behind successful products and services, and that's the whole genesis of this podcast. So we're very honored you're joining us here today.
Welcome to the third episode of Content Ed, the podcast about all things content. In this episode, we trace the journey of someone who dons many hats: a teacher, a mentor, an author, and a vibrant speaker. Meet Dr.Pavan Soni, a mentor for NSRCEL at IIM Bangalore and a columnist at HT Mint, Your Story and People Matters. He was the only Indian author to be shortlisted for the prestigious FT and McKinsey Brackenbower Award for the Best Business Book of the Year 2016. His company, Inflexion Point, offers programs on design thinking, strategic acumen, and consulting skills for several Fortune 500 enterprises. Let's welcome Dr. Pavan Soni in conversation with our CEO, Padmaja Narsipur.
Can you tell us about your journey so far and how it's been, the ups and downs, if you can give us a capsule of your life so far?
So I don't know if my story is worthwhile, but I'll still give it a shot. And we will go reverse chronologically.
Sure.
So currently I'm running this company called Inflexion Point. And I started this company somewhere midway in my PhD program at IIM Bangalore. And the PhD program happened after some years of working in Wipro. And before Wipro, I used to be a management trainee at Titan. Before that, did my MBA from DT Bombay. And prior to that, did my engineering. So usual suspect, engineering, then MBA, then years of experience. And somewhere down the line, I realized that maybe working in a corporate setup wasn't my cup of tea. I thought I would want to really put food where the mouth is and do a PhD program in the space of innovation. Went to IIM Bangalore. And in the interim of my PhD program, I thought that if I don't start a company in this city at this age and with this much of qualification, then who will?
Right.
And where and when?
Yeah.
So I thought, let me take a plunge. And that's where I thought I'd start a company, Inflexion Point. And the whole idea of Inflexion Point is essentially how do we look at building innovation competencies in startups, in student fraternity, and in the large corporate. So that is what the focus of my company is. Innovation, creativity, and strategy are the 3 areas of my work.
Very interesting. So there are a bunch of questions that I have that flow out of what you just told me. One, first of all, you yourself are a product of the Indian school system and the college system, albeit you've been to the best of the best. But our school system is not particularly known for, bringing out the innovation mindset in our students. It somehow seems to be a sad fact that within India, we are not able to create world-class products, whereas Indians who go out of India inevitably seem to end up heading the world's biggest corporations, being master innovators. What is your comment on that?
It's a good question. So there are two things that we need to focus on. The first is completely dismissing our education system may not be correct. Because more than the time that a child spends in school, he or she spends more time at home.
Right.
So I think labeling our education system as not worthy is wrong, in my humble opinion. It is also the style of parenting. What kind of effort are parents putting in rearing up the child? If the parents are not paying that much attention, if parents are not setting the bar high, if they are not putting that effort beyond money, I don't think that anything can be achieved. Because after all, you, me, and several other people, and those who leave India to go abroad, are the part of the same education system.
Sure.
But the difference also lies in their own personal grit and in the investment that the parents put behind them.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one part of the education system. And slowly I realized that things are changing for good.
Mm-hmm.
We had a system of that sort because we lent in a lot of our culture, educational background, etc. from the Soviets.
Mm-hmm.
And Soviets for a very long time had the same system.
Right.
Eventually it all collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
The socialism to communism collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
But it will take some time for us to really wake up to this new reality of capitalism, which has its own set of problems, however.
Sure.
But we are in that twilight phase where we are graduating, and I think the amount of non-public participation and the non-state participation in education, which has gone up recently, is a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
But I would squarely put the responsibility on parents
Mm-hmm.
more than anything else, more than the schools, the teachers, etc. It's about the parents.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are so many amazing people who have done phenomenally well without any schooling at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of the parents.
Parents.
So I think if parents ask this question to themselves, that notwithstanding my school where the child is going to, I can pick the best school
Mm-hmm.
which my money can buy, which my child's caliber can afford. But beyond that, a lot lies on the parenting style. And schools in the US are not radically different either.
Mm.
Trust me on that.
Mm.
We sitting on the East Coast often lament that our education system is down the drains and things there are so different. It is not the case.
Mm.
I think the only change that I can possibly suggest is that instead of emphasizing more on answers, which has been the de facto way in all these years, it's important that we start focusing on the questions.
Right.
More important than the right answer is an important question. Because in the Google economy, you can have answer for anything.
Mm.
You write any gibberish in Google and Google will spit out something for you to chew upon.
Right.
But the more important thing is what are the kind of question that we are asking. And that is what is encouraged in the Western world, the questioning, the curiosity. We are quite curious all these years. But I think that curiosity amidst the kids has to be reinstilled right now. And in terms of the career choices also, if you look at the last 10-15 years, there are so many more career choices which are available to the kids, which were never available in our times, for example.
Very true. Very
So I think things are going positive,
true.
but I would squarely put the responsibility on the parents more than anybody else. That's my view. Especially looking at our history, such an amazingly rich history with enormous amount of diversity, that any totalitarian regime will strangle us very quickly.
Correct.
And we have seen that strangling effect. Like if you look at Bangkok for that matter, right? You can't name a second city in Thailand after Bangkok.
Very true.
You can't name.
Yeah.
There's no second city that you can think of.
Sure.
The difference between the population of people in Bangkok versus second city, I don't know the second big city in the country, is 1:50 or 1:100. That's the difference. At least we have 5-6 big cities that we can talk about.
Correct.
So the point is, these examples may not be correct to be drawn from an Indian context. We have some 5,000 years of history. We have such an amazing amount of enterprising ability in people at the grassroots level, and that you would never see in institutions which are not backed by government.
Correct.
So I think we are reasonably well off right now. I would not raise an alarm bell, and thanks to our government also, we are putting money in the right quadrants. We have allowed a bit of privatization, liberalization in education, which is fantastic. For an IIM, you have an ISB, which is doing pretty well, in my opinion. There are so many B schools. And of course, education, economic development, entrepreneurship is a very noisy process, but it is very unbiased. The beauty is it's always very unbiased. Unless in economies where there is huge amount of state involvement, there is bias. In our economies, there would not be any bias.
The market
It will evolve.
decides.
Market decides. And time decides. So I
Yes.
think I would not be very cynical or very pragmatic, very critical about the way we are going in terms of education, in terms of economy, in terms of business and other avenues. I mean, if you look at the last 15 years itself,
Yeah.
the amount of options available to a common man, instead of just sitting and stuck into that 8-hour job, is so many. Look at yourself,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, think of that doing it in Singapore.
Yeah.
You would not be able to. South Korea, you would not be able to.
Correct.
You'll always be under enormous amount of pressure to comply.
Right.
Here, as long as you are a law-abiding citizen, you have to fear nothing.
That's true.
So I think we are in a very good shape, in my humble opinion. The strength of our country has been able to assimilate cultural nuances, assimilate language, assimilate food habits,
Sure.
ways of doing things, etc. And that is what makes us robust. or what Nicholas Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragile.
Right.
We are one of the most anti-fragile countries in the world. Very anti-fragile. There is no one thing that will break this country. No one thing.
Correct.
On any accounts, political, military, disease-wise, there's such a genetic diversity. Because genetic diversity India has.
Correct.
So no one thing can wipe us. And that's the reason we will be the last civilization standing. If given a choice between exploring the external world and exploring the internal world, the amount of investment that we have done, scientific investment that we have done, and the kind of literature which is available to us in the form of yoga, meditation, and other kind of techniques available to us is so profound. The whole world is now waking up to the realization that assimilating external happiness is a wasteful effort.
Correct.
Because happiness is others, but satisfaction is yours. You have to one day raise up and say that no, I feel satisfied. And we have done that already. Companies like Google, GM, etc., especially Google, I know, they run a program called mindfulness. The whole training on mindfulness, which has come from the Oriental culture, India, China, Japan, etc. And all of them we gave. Most of what Buddhism teaching is, again, we gave it to the whole world. So, our exploration of the world has been internal. So we have done internal engineering and not the external engineering. And maybe what we realize through our own ways of thinking, and obviously none of us are present then, we're just talking about the readings and the writings, is that we realize that external engineering has its own limitation. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you create, the more you want and the more greedy you become. But the internal engineering is where we have sort of mastered. A great example is Sanskrit. I was recently reading a paper at Scientific American saying that if people recite Sanskrit, right, these shlokas in Sanskrit, then their ability to be intelligent and creative becomes multifold. There are certain parts of the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain, that gets protruded. And this is where most of your creative activities are. Their concentration goes up just by reciting Sanskrit shlokas. But because we never paid tremendous attention on writing stuff, all Vedas and Upanishads were spoken,
oral,
right, verbal, and not written.
Yeah.
So not much of a history is available in terms of written down documents and corresponding literature, which is the Western world deems as important. But we had done enormous amount of things.
Can you dwell a little bit upon inflection points for people, for enterprises, for countries? I think it's a very important concept. Can you talk about it?
Glad you invoked Andy Grove. So when I was in my college, I read this book by Andy Grove, Only the Paranoid Survives.
Yeah.
And in that book, he talks about inflection points.
Yes, he does.
And that day, believe me, that day I decided that if I ever start my company, I'll call it Inflection Point.
Okay.
So the name goes back to Andy Grove's book. So full credit to that man. And Andy Grove spoke about inflection point, and he talks about two major inflection points that happened in the history of Intel when they moved from the memory to the semiconductors.
Correct.
And then when they were looking at this inflection point which was happening to them in terms of the branding of the Intel Inside campaign in 91. And then the third inflection point that somehow could not well navigated was that of moving from these machines to the phones, which Intel lost out to Qualcomm.
True.
They couldn't navigate the inflection point out that well. So the point is, inflection point happens when you have met some sort of a saturation in terms of your growth. And I strongly believe that life is growth.
Yeah.
If you stop growing, you decay and you die. Because right now, as we're talking, there is a continuous regeneration of cells in your body and death of cells in your body.
Sure.
But the only thing that is keeping us alive and kicking is that the rate of generation of new cells is more than death of old cells. The day it topples, we die. That's about it. That's the inflection point.
Correct.
Now we all saturate. We all saturate cerebrally, emotionally, economically, socially. And the whole idea is that can I rejuvenate that growth all over again? Can I change the slope of the curve from a saturating one to again upliftment? That is what the whole notion of inflection point was. And my view is that I strongly subscribe to this and I live by it on a daily basis, is that my objective in life is to touch as many lives as possible, meaningfully, period. That's all I want to do. Touch as many lives as possible, meaningfully. And inflection point then becomes a vehicle for me to do so. I would anyways have done that with or without Inflexion Point. But this is an embodiment of my thoughts. And I leave no channel unexplored. This podcast, anything whatsoever may come my way. The whole idea is to ensure that there are people who would benefit from whatever little I know, and why not?
Correct.
Because whatever little I know has always come from the people who have taught me unknowingly. Some of my role models are even unaware that they are my role models. I never told them. And they don't even know if I exist. Which means that I have sort of plucked those pearls of wisdom very unknowingly, subconsciously from people around me. And if I can't give it back, then I think the whole deal is inconsequential. So that's the whole idea of Inflexion Point.
How does a startup have light and sustain a flame of innovation? How do startup members be creative? How do we start the process and how do we sustain it?
It's a very, very useful question, especially looking at the audience. Many of them may be contemplating. The first thing that we need to understand about the startup is this very fundamental question: why you? Why are you designed to succeed? It's a very important question. Now, you can start a company from two vantage points. One is that you find an opportunity, a vacuum in the marketplace, and you want to address that vacuum. Second is you have this burning sensation and a desire and possibly the caliber to bring a unique value to the table. What happens with the former, which is addressing the vacuum part, is that there is no reason why you can only see the vacuum. And even if you are the only one who sees the vacuum, there is no reason that you will be the best suited to address the vacuum. Unless and until there is something unique in you. Now, the uniqueness in you, notwithstanding your academic qualification, your work experience, or whatever else you have, one of the biggest unique contributions to bring to the table that is difficult to match possibly is your passion and your grit. What I mean by passion is your ability to go at it without self-doubt and in the face of people doubting. That is passion. And the grit is your ability to withstand failure. Repeatedly, if you have failure, you have to go again and again and go again and make it proof. Now, because you have that, which means you don't have to wait for the vacuum also to be available. You can create an opportunity for yourself. So for any startup, the fundamental question is that one needs to be answered is why you? Why are you most suitable to make money and to address this problem than anybody else? Many times people start with what is there in the market versus what is there in you. I always think what is there in you is a more important question than what is there in the market. Opportunities are never given, they are always created. Like 10 years back, nobody thought Bangalore would be a market for momos.
Correct. Yeah.
There's idli, sambar, dosa, every corner is darshini. That momo is a big business in the city, am I right?
Oh yeah.
Nobody did market research. Talking to people that said, would you like to have momo over idli? People said that let us put it and we'll see what happens next.
Sure.
Or cane juice. I see that. Or tattoos.
Tattoos, yeah. Oh my
Am I
God.
right?
Yeah.
Nobody did market research to identify a market for tattoos and the price points and henceforth and so on. So if you have something unique to offer, there is always a market. That's the first point. The second point is discipline. One of the big myths that we have had is that you need to be taking risk to be an entrepreneur. I don't think that is true. Entrepreneurs don't take any more risk than a normal employee. But entrepreneurs are far more disciplined than a normal employee. That's my fundamental belief. The reason why people they love the comfort of a large organization is because they do not want to be self-disciplined. If somebody can discipline you, then why would you like to be self-disciplined?
Correct.
Initially your parents, then your spouse, then your employer, then maybe your kids.
Yeah. True.
All through your life, there is somebody trying to discipline you and hence you can slack. The moment I remove that factors around you, you are left by yourself. If you don't discipline, you will die. And that's where entrepreneurship is all about. So entrepreneurship is not about, and I can talk as an entrepreneur, not as an academic or a consultant or a coach. I run a company.
Correct.
What happens is you absolutely have an absolute high level of discipline. I am not taking any more risk than what I used to when I was an employee or a teacher. But now I am far more disciplined because I know that anything and everything which I do, I have to bear the consequences.
Yeah.
Because nobody else will bear the consequences.
Yeah.
I need to ensure that. And not only me, I am accountable for other people's lives and their consequences. And that's what makes me disciplined.
Yeah.
So if we can reduce the element of the risk perception people have, that only if you take risk you can be an entrepreneur, I don't think so. Only if you're self-disciplined, you can be an entrepreneur.
How do you discover that inner perfection and have it manifest outwards in this hubbub of social media, over the top, technologies like Netflix and Amazon Prime? Our children are now exposed to it so early in life.
Mark Twain said that the secret of success is ignorance and confidence. Now we have to start ignoring stuff. It's very, very important. We need to teach our children also, because the sheer overwhelming amount of information in the guise of knowledge or data in the guise of information which is thrown at us can make us quickly lose the bearing once and for all. Instead of adding, we need to start deleting stuff completely. We need to own our world, absolutely, without any doubt. And children need to be shown a purpose, not in a threatening way. Not if you don't do this, this is going to happen. But if you do this, this is going to happen. There are just about two ways. One is, if you don't do, I'll do this. But if you do this, this is what is going to happen to you. This latter part, which is more reaffirmative, more positive psychology based arguments and discussion, that's what we need to reinforce. Because children can't just see beyond that instant gratification of checking another email or watching another movie or finishing another cartoon. Parents need to pull that horizon of gratification to a slightly more longish one. That's very critical. So, long story short, we need to start ignoring stuff. A lot of stuff has to be ignored. Life was phenomenal without them, and they will be even more so without them. Sure. All these WhatsApp group and Facebook and all that. And importantly, we need to abstain, like fasting, detoxification. That's how we abstain them. And children will grow up to be, if there is one thing that parents can do to their children, one thing, it's all about self-confidence and independent thinking that comes from self-confidence. In the future, my biggest fear is that we may not have a generation of kids who are independent thinkers. That's my biggest fear. Their thinking will be so colored by people's opinion. Again, I'll share a quote of Mark Twain, who said that if you are always on the side of the majority, it's time that you pause and rethink.
We often talk of innovative products or ideas, but rarely get to see what goes on behind the scenes to make it happen. What drives innovation? Is it an overnight phenomenon or a scientific process? Wait until the next episode to hear it from the man himself. Part 2 of Dr. Pavan Soni's talk coming up soon.